Joseph. In the Bible, Joseph is one of the most famous dreamers, as well as one of the most famous dream interpreters. Genesis chapter 37 contains the first record of his dreams. Genesis chapter 37 verses 1 to 11. So Jacob, Israel, lived in the land where his father Isaac had been a stranger, sojourner, or resident alien, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, when he was 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. The boy was with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's secondary wives, and Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father. Now Israel, Jacob loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a distinctive multicolored tunic. His brothers saw that their father loved Joseph more than all of his brothers, so they hated him, and could not find it within themselves to speak to him on friendly terms. Now Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. He said to them, "Please listen to the details of this dream which I have dreamed. We brothers were binding sheaves of grain stalks in the field, and lo, my sheaf suddenly got up and stood upright and remained standing. And behold, your sheaf stood all around my sheaf and bowed down in respect." His brothers said to him, "Are you actually going to reign over us? Are you really going to rule and govern us as your subjects?" So they hated him even more for telling them about his dreams and for his arrogant words. But Joseph dreamed still another dream, and told it to his brothers as well. He said, "See here, I have again dreamed a dream, and lo, this time I saw 11 stars, and the sun and the moon bowed down in respect to me." He told it to his father as well as to his brothers, but his father rebuked him and said to him in disbelief, "What is the meaning of this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come to bow down to the ground in respect before you?" Joseph's brothers were envious and jealous of him, but his father kept the words of Joseph in mind, wondering about their meaning. They showed through easily deciphered symbols that Joseph's family would one day bow to him in respect. His brothers did not appear to be happy with the dream, and sold Joseph into slavery out of hatred. Joseph was eventually imprisoned in Egypt. Number 6. Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker. While imprisoned, Joseph interpreted some of Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker's dreams. Genesis chapter 40. Now some time later, the cupbearer, or butler, and the baker for the king of Egypt offended their lord, Egypt's king. Pharaoh, Sesostris II, was extremely angry with his two officials, the chief of the cupbearers and the chief of the bakers. He put them in confinement in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard put Joseph in charge of them, and he served them, and they continued to be in custody for some time. Then the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, both dreamed a dream in the same night, each man with his own significant dream, and each dream with its personal interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning and looked at them, he saw that they were sad and depressed. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in confinement with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so downhearted today?" And they said to him, "We have each dreamed distinct dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." So Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell me your dreams." So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, "In my dream there was a grapevine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. Then as soon as it budded, Its blossoms burst open, and its clusters produced ripe grapes in rapid succession. Now Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup. Then I placed the cup into Pharaoh's hand. Then Joseph said to him, "This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches represent 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head, present you in public, and restore you to your position. And you will again put Pharaoh's cup into his hand, just as you did when you were his cupbearer. Only think of me when it goes well with you, and please show me kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this house. For in fact, I was taken or stolen from the land of the Hebrews by unlawful force, and even here I have done nothing for which they should put me in the dungeon." When the chief baker saw that the interpretation of the dream was good, he said to Joseph, "I also dreamed, and in my dream there were 3 cake baskets on my head, and in the top basket there were some of all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh. But the birds of prey were eating these foods out of the basket on my head." Joseph answered, "This is the interpretation of it. The 3 baskets represent 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and will hang you on a tree, gallows or pole, and you will not so much as be given a burial, but the birds will eat your flesh." Now on the 3rd day, which was the Pharaoh's birthday, he released the 2 men from prison, and made a feast for all his servants. And he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker, that is, presented them in public among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his office, and the cupbearer once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But Pharaoh hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had interpreted the meaning of the dreams to them. Yet, even after all that, the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot all about him. He explained with God's help that the cupbearer would return to Pharaoh's service, but the baker would be killed. Number 7. Pharaoh. Pharaoh himself had a dream 2 years later which Joseph interpreted. Genesis chapter 41. Now it happened at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile. And lo, there came up out of the Nile 7 healthy cows, sleek and handsome and fat, and they grazed in the reed grass, in a marshy pasture. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the Nile, ugly and gaunt and raw-boned, and stood by the fat cows on the bank of the Nile. Then the ugly and gaunt and raw-boned cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. Then Pharaoh awoke. Then he fell asleep and dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain came up on a single stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 ears of grain, thin and dried up by the east wind, sprouted after them. Then the thin ears swallowed the 7 plump and full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and it was a dream. So when morning came, his spirit was troubled and disturbed, and he sent and called for all the magicians and all the wise men of Egypt. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them to him. Then the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, saying, "I would mention my faults today. 2 years ago, Pharaoh was angry with his servants, and he put me in confinement in the house of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker. We dreamed a dream on the same night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the significance of the interpretation of his own dream. Now there was with us in the prison a young man, a Hebrew, servant to the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us, to each man according to the significance of his own dream. And just as he interpreted the dreams for us, so it happened. I was restored to my office as chief cupbearer, and the baker was hanged." Then Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph, and they hurriedly brought him out of the dungeon. And when Joseph shaved himself and changed his clothes, or making himself presentable, he came to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I have dreamed a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. And I have heard it said about you that you can understand a dream and interpret it." Joseph answered Pharaoh, "It is not in me to interpret the dream. God, not I, will give Pharaoh a favorable answer through me." So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "In my dream, I was standing on the bank of the Nile, and 7 fat, sleek, and handsome cows came up out of the river, and they grazed in the reed grass of a marshy pasture. Lo, 7 other cows came up after them, very ugly and gaunt, just skin and bones, such emaciated animals as I have never seen in all the land of Egypt. And the lean and ugly cows ate up the first 7 fat cows. Yet when they had devoured them, it could not be detected that they had eaten them, because they were still as thin and emaciated as before. Then I awoke, but again I fell asleep and dreamed. I saw in my second dream 7 ears of grain, plump and good, growing on a single stalk. And lo, 7 other ears, withered, thin, and scorched by the east wind, sprouted after them. And the thin ears devoured the 7 good ears. Now I told this to the magicians and soothsayers, but there was no one who could explain it to me." Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, "The 2 dreams are one and the same, and have one interpretation. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The 2 dreams are one and the same. The 7 thin and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and also the 7 thin ears, dried up and scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine and hunger. This is the message, just as I have told Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Listen very carefully. 7 years of great abundance will come throughout all the land of Egypt. But afterward, 7 years of famine and hunger will come, and there will be such desperate need that all the great abundance of the previous years will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, as if it never happened, and famine and destitution will ravage and destroy the land. So the great abundance will become forgotten in the land because of that subsequent famine, for it will be very severe." That the dream was repeated twice to Pharaoh, and in 2 different ways, indicates that this matter is fully determined and established by God, and God will bring it to pass very quickly. So now let Pharaoh prepare ahead, and look for a man discerning and clear-headed and wise, and set him in charge over the land of Egypt as governor under Pharaoh. Let Pharaoh take action to appoint overseers and officials over the land, and set aside 1/5 of the produce of the entire land of Egypt in the 7 years of abundance. Let them gather as a tax all of the 1/5 of the food of these good years that are coming, and store up grain under the direction and authority of Pharaoh, and let them guard the food in fortified granaries in the cities. That food shall be put in storage as a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine and hunger, which will occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land or people will not be ravaged during the famine." Now the plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all of his servants. So Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find a man like this, a man equal to Joseph in whom is the divine Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since your God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and clear-headed and wise as you are. You shall have charge over my house, and all my people shall be governed according to your word and pay respect to you with reverence, submission, and obedience. Only in matters of the throne will I be greater than you in Egypt." Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you in charge over all the land of Egypt." The Pharaoh took off his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and dressed him in official vestments of fine linen, and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a second chariot, and runners proclaimed before him, "Attention, bow the knee." And he set him over all the land of Egypt. God's purpose was to raise Joseph to second in command over Egypt, and to save the Egyptians and the Israelites from a horrible famine.